When he retired after beating Andre Agassi in the 2002 U.S. Open Finals, Pete Sampras retired as maybe the greatest tennis player in history. You can see the records on this list. 14 Grand Slams, 7 at Wimbledon, and 6 years ending as the world's #1 player. He's playing competitive tennis this week for the first time since the 2002 U.S. Open in Boston as part of Jim Courier's Champions Series. It is Pete Sampras. Pete, welcome to the Hot List on ESPN News. You hate Jim Courier. Why join his tour?
I don't hate Jim Courier. When I competed, I hated him, but now we're good friends. I grew up with Jim a little bit. We played doubles together. We spent a lot of time together. But when you're competing for majors and 1-2 in the world at the time, we didn't get along too well on the court. But off the court, we got along pretty good. He asked me to play a few events this year, and it worked out timing-wise that here I'm in Boston.
I was saying that jokingly. You and he, some of the biggest names on the tour. Mats Wilander, you're going to play on Friday, I understand. Saturday, you and John McEnroe. How serious are you taking this?
I think we're all taking it seriously. It's still competitive. I don't think we're quite as tight as we used to be back in our primes. It is a little bit more, I don't want to say fun, but it's a little lighter. But we all want to play well, and we all want to win, and there's prize money involved, and we have a lot of pride in playing well. So I've been preparing and getting myself ready to play pretty well. I'm still hitting the ball okay, so it's still competitive.
Still hitting the ball okay, probably a little bit better than okay. But for those of us who are tennis fans, watching the game's all-time greats play, we'll get the rest of the sports world in. What do you think the sport of tennis can do about the guys who are currently in the top 10, 20 in the rankings to sort of improve its lot in the American sports landscape?
Well, I think if you look at the history of the sport, there's always been an American presence. If it was Borg, McEnroe, Connors, Lendl, myself and Andre, there's always an American presence. And knowing the American fans and media, we've always had an American either #1, winning Wimbledon, winning the U.S. Open. And when you don't have that, people in this country lose interest quickly. Now we have Federer and Nadal who are doing great things, and there's not an American guy really challenging them. I think it loses a little bit of its notoriety through the media. That's why we need a Blake or a Roddick to really try to step up, challenge Federer for the majors and the ranking, and develop some sort of rivalry. Ultimately, that's kind of what sells the sport in this country. And right now, it's just those two guys dominating. It's really hard to really grasp the sport, and we need just an American presence. We're doing well, but Federer is just, the timing of everything. Federer is just, he's a great player, playing great pretty much every week. So that's just where we're at right now. Hopefully that will change over the next couple of years, and Roddick especially can step up and challenge him a little bit more.
Federer is now making the run for your record of 14 slams. He's at 10, and I understand you welcomed him into your home in California recently before Indian Wells. What did you guys talk about? We hit for a while, and we talked for about an hour after. And we just kind of talked about the game, talked about just two guys yapping away about the sport. I asked him questions, he asked me questions, and we like to keep that a little more on the private side, but it was really an opportunity for me to get to know him a little bit, and everything is true about Roger. He's a great guy. He's a great tennis player. Handles himself well on and off the court. He's a real credit to the sport and all sports. And we competed a little bit the next day, and I was happy to say I kind of held my own and made him work a little bit, which was a good accomplishment for me at this age. When you watch
35,
him,
and so.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, and I said we just we talked about the game and how the game has changed, how the game is more from the baseline versus my year. The guys came in and served and volleyed, and I asked him about grass court tennis, why everyone stays back on grass, and he just says that's what everyone's doing. In my era, is like everybody came in and served and volleyed, and that was a question I had for him, why he stays back on grass, and we just talked about life in general. He's had a girlfriend for 6 years. Talked about marriage. Talked about kids. Just two guys that it was interesting. Just two guys, two great players, just playing on my private court, and no media, no fans. It was just two guys, and it was pretty cool to look back upon it. And he's won 10, I've won 14. It was 24 majors on that court. It was pretty cool.
What was the most interesting thing you learned about him? I just think everything that people really wrote about him and talked about him, it just kind of came true. He was just very down to earth, very funny. You know, I think he's a little bit like me when I was in my prime. I mean, he's pretty reserved and businesslike, but you get him off the press and off the court. I mean, he's pretty funny guy and kind of has a dry sense of humor. So I just realized he had a pretty light personality.
Today in Spain, he and Rafael Nadal are playing on this hybrid court. Half of it is clay, and then the other side is entirely grass. What would be the hardest thing for a player of your caliber about playing on a court like that?
You know, I have no idea. You know, when someone told me about that, I was thinking, how are they going to pull this off? Just to even get the right balls, or I don't know. It just seemed really odd to me. Him being on the grass court side, obviously, you know, he's a pretty natural mover, and grass is a little bit tricky. But I just think I'd have to see it to really understand it, how it would play. I think movement's a big deal, but the positioning of where the players are going to be on the surfaces. I mean, Roger's going to try to come in. And now, is Roger going to be on the side of the grass? Is that right?
Yeah, they switch it's as normal. They switch every odd game.
Oh,
they're switching shoes between each session.
Wow. It's interesting. It's a bit of a stretch trying to pull that off. Yeah. It's a little hokey, but I mean, maybe there's an entertainment value there. I don't know, but I'd have to just actually watch it to really understand it, because it's something that I've never even crossed my mind. It doesn't make sense to me.
I always sort of promised myself if I ever had the opportunity to interview you, I'd ask you about the quarterfinals of the '96 U.S. Open, the Wretch against Alex Corretja. What do you remember about that? Yeah. When did you first realize I'm about to heave on the court?
Well, I was starting to get tired in the fourth set. I remember walking into the match, and you try to time when you're going to go out there and when you're supposed to eat and really go in there with some fuel in the tank. And I remember walking out there just a little bit empty on fuel. And everyone thought it was an easy match for me because it was Corretja and all that. So I was in the fourth set, and I was feeling a little bit tired, a little bit heavy. It was we were out there for 3.5, 4 hours, and in the beginning of the fifth set, I started drinking some Coke and trying to get a little more caffeine, some sugar in me, and I was just starting to get really, really tired, especially close to that tiebreaker. My body started really cramping a little bit, my back, and I wasn't feeling right. I just basically was going to hit the wall, and won on the tiebreaker. We played a tough point, and that was kind of where I really hit the wall and got sick and kind of threw up the water and the Coke that I had in my stomach, and it was an awful feeling. I remember feeling tired. I remember the fans. I remember them really getting behind me and supporting me, and they knew I was suffering out there. It was kind of a zoo-like atmosphere there at the end. And the only thing that saved me was it was a tiebreaker, that it was going to be over quick. And he ended up double faulting a match point. It was a bizarre moment. I've never felt so physically poor on the court. I think nerves came into it, because I didn't win a major that year. I think going out there with no fuel in my body, a lot of stress, and just everything combined into getting sick out there. And it wasn't pretty. I remember that night getting some IVs in me and felt a little better, but just a bizarre atmosphere.
It was a memorable moment. Which moment are you most proud of in your career?
I think probably my last two majors that I won, when I broke the record and beating Rafter in the final and having my parents there for the first time at Wimbledon. That was a great moment. And then going through 2 years of not winning an event and doing pretty well, but getting married in that time, and kind of the press getting on my wife about my marriage and how that was the fault of my career. Then winning that last major and sharing that with my wife, who was pregnant at the time, and going up to the stands and sharing that moment that was a great moment to end my career on that note. Vindication, kind of had the last word on those 2 years, and I finally won that title, beating Andre, who was my rival, my competitor through the mid-'90s, and that tops it all right there. Those last two majors were real sweet.
Well, a magical career, and we look forward to future Nerf doubles matches between your two kids and Andre's two kids. But in the meantime, Pete, we're glad to see you back on the court. The website is championsseriestennis.com. You'll be in Boston this week. Pete Sampras, thanks for coming on the Hot List.
Thanks for having me.